You think it's just a routine traffic stop, and then the questions start getting personal. Have you been drinking? Where are you coming from tonight? The officers are calm, they're friendly, but every question is designed to make you slip up. I'm Barrett Dye. I've spent years defending DWI cases in Texas, and I've seen firsthand how fast these routine traffic stops turn into arrests. This video walks you through the exact tricks cops use and are trained to use during DWI stops, so you don't fall for them, you don't give up your rights, and you don't make their job any easier. Let's get right into it. When you're pulled over in Texas for a suspected DWI, the first trick cops often use is what I call the friendly conversation trap. You might think the officer is just being nice, asking you how your night's going, where you've been, or what you've had to eat. But behind that polite tone, every word out of your mouth is being analyzed and sometimes even recorded. Here's why this matters. Officers are trained to listen for little details like slurred speech, confusion, or even your choice of words, and that later can be used against you. For example, if you mention you were just at dinner with friends, they might probe further. Oh, did you have anything to drink with that? Even innocent answers can lead them down a path to gather more evidence. A real client of mine, let's call him Joe, once told me he thought being honest and open would help him. He admitted to just one beer. But that was all the officer needed to order field sobriety tests and later justify an arrest. In Texas, any admission of drinking before driving is almost always used to push the investigation forward. Officers I know tell me that they have this little understanding that 2 beers is never 2 beers. What it really equals is something closer to 6. They don't believe your honesty anyway. They just use it as an admission that you've been drinking. Here's the takeaway. Officers are not just making small talk. They're building a case from the second they approach your window. Always remember, you have the right to remain silent. If you're polite but brief, you can avoid giving them more ammunition. Next up, the subtle observation game. This is where officers look for something, and I mean anything, that they can call a sign of intoxication. You might be thinking, but I'm sober, I'm fine. It doesn't matter. The officer is trained to write down every little detail. Nervousness, fumbling for your license, red eyes, the smell of your breath or clothes, even if you're just tired from a long day of driving. In Texas, officers often write these observations in their report to justify further action. I've seen cases where the only evidence was that the driver's hands were shaking and their eyes looked glassy. No alcohol was found, but the officer's notes still led to an arrest. Let's make this real. Imagine you're pulled over late at night after a long shift. You're exhausted, you're rubbing your eyes, your hands are shaking because you're nervous and anxious about being late. Everything you do, from the way you talk to how you reach for your wallet, is being watched and written down. It's not about what's normal for you, it's about what the officer can claim is suspicious. My best advice, move slowly and deliberately. Don't rush, and don't volunteer explanations unless you're specifically asked, and even then, be careful. Remember, it's their job to collect possible evidence, so don't make it any easier for them. The third trick, field sobriety test setups. You've probably seen these on TV or maybe even experienced them yourself. The officer asks you to walk a straight line, stand on one leg, or follow a pen with your eyes. Here's the real deal. These tests aren't designed for pass-fail. They're a fishing expedition for clues of intoxication. If it is a pass-fail, which it's not, they are absolutely designed to make you fail. First, the conditions are always less than ideal. We're talking about the side of a Texas highway at night. Cars zooming by, wind blowing, uneven pavement, maybe even rain or snow or cold. No one performs their best in these situations, especially if you're nervous or scared. But here's what most people don't know. These tests are totally subjective. The officer highlights every little mistake. Maybe you wobbled because you were nervous. Maybe you lost your balance because the ground was uneven. But in the officer's mind, and later in their report, these are potential signs of intoxication. Let me tell you about a past client of mine. He had severely bad knees, but the officer ultimately convinced him to still do the field sobriety tests. The officer still made him walk the line. Surprise, surprise. He stumbled a bit. In the report, it said he couldn't maintain balance, even though he had already told the officer he had terrible knees. That's how easy it is for these tests to later be stacked against you. Here's an important fact in Texas. You're not required by law to perform field sobriety tests. You can politely decline. If you're ever in doubt, ask, am I required to do this? If the answer is no, you can refuse, but don't let nerves or pressure trick you into helping the officer make their case stronger. Let's talk about the odor of alcohol. It's It's probably the most common justification officers use during DWI stops in Texas. This is the go-to line in almost every arrest report. I detected the odor of alcoholic beverage coming from the driver's breath. You can see it in every report. Here's the problem. You don't have to be intoxicated for your breath to smell like alcohol, right? Maybe you had one drink with dinner several hours ago. Maybe there was alcohol spilled on your clothes from a party. Heck, sometimes foods like mouthwash, certain medications, or even kombucha, they can give off a similar smell. But at that moment, the officer is going to use the odor as a reason to further investigate. Let's be real. Everyone's breath can smell a little funky after a long day or after eating certain foods. But when an officer claims they smell alcohol, it often leads to more intrusive tests, like a breathalyzer or even a blood draw. In Texas, odor of alcohol is often enough by itself to justify asking for field sobriety tests or making an arrest, even if your driving was perfect and you didn't break any other laws. I've helped people who had their lives turned upside down just because an officer claimed to smell something. If this happens to you, don't argue about it on the side of the road. Don't get defensive. Just remember, it's another tool in the officer's bag of tricks, and the best thing you can do is to stay calm, say as little as possible, and let your attorney handle it later. Here's another big one, the quick consent pressure. This is when officers try to get you to agree on the spot to searches or tests you don't have to take. They might say, why don't you just do this quick breath test so we can get you on your way? Or, if you don't have anything to hide, just let me look in your car. It sounds innocent, right? But it's anything but. In Texas, once you give consent to search or consent for a test, you give up a lot of your rights. Any little thing they find, maybe an empty can from last week or a prescription bottle, can be used to justify further investigation, more charges, or even arrest. One client, let's call him Jorge, was pulled over for a broken taillight. The officer asked if he could just take a quick look. Jorge, wanting to be helpful, of course agreed. The officer found an old beer can under the seat from a friend's fishing trip weeks before. Next thing Jorge knew, he was out of the car and being questioned about drinking and driving. Now, Texas law is actually on your side here. You can say, I don't consent to any searches, and I'd rather not take any tests. Be firm but polite, and don't let the officer push some urgency and get you into consenting to these things. They might act annoyed or perturbed that you're invoking these rights, but remember, you have these rights and you must use them to protect yourself. Last but not least is the you're not under arrest yet bluff. Officers love to say things like, I'm just trying to figure things out, or you're not in trouble, I just have a few questions. But this is almost always a tactic to keep you talking, searching for that one little detail that lets them escalate to an arrest. Under Texas law, you don't have to answer questions beyond providing your basic information, your license, registration, and proof of insurance. You don't have to explain where you're coming from, how much you've had to drink, or whether you feel okay to drive. The more you say, the more you risk giving them something that they can use. I had a client who thought she was helping herself by chatting it up with the officer. She ended up talking herself right into handcuffs, not because she admitted to anything, but because she mentioned going to a friend's house where there was wine. That was enough for the officer to claim reasonable suspicion, even though she hadn't drunk any herself. It's not about being rude, it's about protecting your rights. If an officer says you're not under arrest and keeps asking fishing questions, it's okay to say, I'd rather not answer any questions without a lawyer present. Remember, in most cases, anything you say can and will be used against you. You've just learned 6 of the most common tricks cops use during DWI stops right here in Texas. They aren't illegal and they aren't always obvious, but they are designed to make you help them build a case against you. Here's what you should take away. Stay calm. Be polite. Give only the information you're required to give. Don't do field sobriety tests if you don't have to. And don't give consent to searches you don't want. Don't let yourself get pulled into endless conversation. If you want to know exactly what to say and what not to say when officers suspect you of DWI, don't miss my next video. Say these words when cops suspect you of DWI. In that video, I'll give you the real phrases that can protect your rights and maybe even save your freedom. It's a must-watch for every Texas driver. We'll see you over there.